Hi, I'm Bob Hayes, the Managing Director of the Security Executive Council. Oftentimes we're asked by practitioners how they can advance the security programs that they currently have in place, or why a certain individual has been so successful. Through the Security Leadership Research Institute, we've looked at this topic for over 15 years. We have identified 6 key factors that should play a significant role in the success of enhancing or moving your programs ahead, really in any organization. We call it OPAL Plus. Let's talk about OPAL Plus. The 6 areas: organizational readiness, program maturity, leadership fit, how well the leader fits in the organization. The pluses that we identified later that have so much impact are corporate culture, executive risk appetite, and the executive drivers or catalysts for your programs. To really advance yourself or your programs, you've really got to be aware of these and apply them specifically and intentionally to your organization. Let's talk a little bit more about each one of these. Organizational readiness is the O. Organizational readiness is really what security means to the leaders of the company. 24% of the Fortune 500 still does not have an identifiable security leader. Their organizational readiness level is 0. And that's the first one that was shocking to us, that how can we have these large companies like ours that don't have a security leader? Well, they don't think they need one. They may think security is each person's responsibility. I don't really know how they do it. We've gone in and started security programs for companies that have gone 100 years without it. But each one that we've gone into had a different reason for why they haven't had security in the past. The second element of organizational readiness is security as a specific or contained program. So it's investigations, it's physical security, access control, lights, locks, and alarms. It's not a very comprehensive program. It was probably put in place to answer or try to address a certain problem. These are very focused and really a myopic view and often an out-of-date view of what security is. Third type of organizational readiness we found is the company that believes that security is a valuable control method, either for the business or key parts of the business security-related issues. So, for example, research and development, we need to protect our information. And they see the value that security brings to that. It might be for a company that is got a lot of supply chain problems in getting their product into the country, or they're having trouble with counterfeit. They've experimented with security. They've gotten someone in there that could really solve that problem and add value. But, again, it's just a control method in response to an issue. The fourth type of organizational readiness state is what we call the partner or the enabler. This is really where security is becoming part of the oversight team. They're often brought to the table when they're getting ready to plan for a new venture, a merger. We're going to expand into this different country. This is really a great place and probably where we all want to be, where security is part of the leadership team. They're viewed as business people who have security impact, and they're really mainstream in the organization. The last one is probably one of the most difficult. It's the security as a revenue enhancement or value adder. We'd all love to be there, where you contribute to the profit of the company. Now, more often than not, probably the best you can do is to be cost neutral, that we provide security at no cost to the company. That's really a valued state right now. The point to remember in all of this is you really can't control the state of readiness. You want to use this information to plan, communicate, design, and act. You really have to understand what the company wants and work around that current state of readiness. Listen to the leadership and offer the right solutions for where they are on organizational readiness. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the P in OPAL, and that's program maturity. FCC has created, we think, the first model for corporate security maturity. This is really important because program maturity is a common language throughout most corporations, and they're going to want to know where you fall on a maturity scale, or they'll be influenced by the fact if you can tell them what your maturity level is. We've come up, like many maturity models have, with 5 states of maturity. So at level 1, this is your reactionary level. This is where really security answers the phone and they resolve the problem. This is more of almost a law enforcement response. They are there to solve the problems that are brought to them. This is real common in a startup or initial service mode when you're just getting off the ground and you haven't had time to put your overall plan together and enable it. The second level is the managed. And managed is really more where everybody in your group is able to provide the same level of service. You're starting to get some consistency. It can still be reactive, but at least you're all on the same page. And if you're not in the office and someone calls, they're going to get kind of the same level of service they would if you were there. This is better. It reduces complaints. It'll solve some of your problems, assuming it's all good service that they're getting. But the business will think that you're paying attention and bringing on good people that are reacting the same way that you do. Third level is documented, and if you're ever audited by one of the big 4, you have somebody come in from the outside, this is really what they're going to look at. Have you documented your processes, procedures? Do you have defined qualifications and standards for your people? Do your programs have goals and objectives? Can you communicate them to others? Are they well defined? This is really an important area if you're going to be able to grow and if you're going to have a large program that covers a huge geography. This whole area of documentation is really required to get consistency on a scalable level. The fourth level is really something that SEC has been pushing for a long time. This is the measured and incorporated. This is, can you measure and communicate the value of what you do? Can you use those measurements to identify gaps? Can you improve operations based on those measurements? And oh, by the way, can you show the value of what you're doing to the organization? If you can do that, you're in really solid shape within the company. The last one is, again, that revenue enhancement area. Are you really helping the business? Can you define it with losses you're avoiding? Do your recoveries have more of that? How does that compare to what you're costing the company? Are you getting close to that cost neutral? Level 5 is where security becomes what we think is a comprehensive function. It's enterprise-wide, interconnected, a rich suite of products and services. You've got diversity in your staff and your resources, and you're providing services to almost every area of the company: HR, legal, IT, supply chain, finance, manufacturing, R&D, and the employees. And so knowing where your security program is currently helps you develop a roadmap to a desired end state. And by the way, this isn't really a destination. This is a journey. And you can drop back. There are things that can take you, like an acquisition, where your whole organization is, say, at a level 4, and you acquire a company that doesn't even have security. Well, guess what? You're now back at a level 1. Because you want to take your whole organization to that level. Okay, let's take a look at the L in OPAL. This is the leadership continuum. This has a lot to do with you. We've identified 7 distinct leadership types in all the different companies we've worked with, and they fall on a continuum. The first one that many of you are familiar with is somebody that's brand new to security or the industry. Somebody that just comes in from law enforcement or maybe they came in from IT or audit or even a business function. They don't have a security background. They might have law enforcement, military, physical security, something along those lines, but they're really their first job in corporate security. And by the way, this is really influenced a lot by organizational readiness. It depends on what they think security is as to who they're going to go hire. The second person on the continuum is learning the other side. This might be somebody who came over from IT security and now has responsibility for corporate security. Or it could be somebody who came in from the business. And we've had a number of those where they've brought in business leaders to head up security because they're looking for more business results. The third one, and this is also common, and that's the program creator or the validator. You're starting or building a new program. Startups, spin-offs, new merged organizations that are finally going to start security. This is where we most frequently see those. Fourth level is the program facilitator. This is a person whose program is up and running, the corporation's happy with it. Really, you're managing your own or someone else's programs. Everybody's pretty happy. It's staffed well. It's got an established budget. It's been in place for 5, 10, 15 years, and there's no real big demands on it. It's very different to manage a program than it is to create one or to recreate one. I was never much of a facilitator person. I liked to do the startups and then move on once it was up and running. The fifth one is the urgent innovator expander. This is often someone who's responding to a really significant incident. They've had a mass shooting. They've had huge fire. They've had a major loss of inventory. They've had a terrorist attack. This is somebody that is in a situational response, and they want someone in to help prevent that in the future. The sixth one is the program expander, expanding through strategy. The terms you've heard are we want to take this program to the next level. And then the last one, and this is the rare one, this is the one that we all tend to admire the most, and that's the next generation program leader. This is the person that always seems to be innovating. They're getting into new areas. They're on the horizon meeting the future business changes that are happening. This is the person that really has program up and running, a great team under them, and they're moving forward. One thing to say about this on this continuum is that you can be dropped back to an earlier stage, again, through a acquisition or a divestiture even, when they split companies in half. It can really move you either way on this continuum. But why do you need to know this? You really need to assess if you're the right person and if you have the right team to address where the organization is going to go based on the other opal levels of that. So based on the organizational readiness, based on the program maturity, you've got to keep all of these things in balance. So that was our initial findings when we were studying successful programs. We really zoomed in on these three major elements, and they made a ton of sense. It allowed us to really work with some people and advance their programs. But as the more we got into it, the more we started to see that there were other factors influencing the success. The first big learning was corporate culture. Corporate culture is huge. You can have the best program in the world, but if it doesn't match the culture, it's going nowhere. And I've personally experienced this, where the most successful things I did in one company were hated in another company. We've identified what we think are some of the more common cultures that you might run into. And some of these are much easier to work in than others. All of them, you can be very successful if you match the culture, but some of them may not be as satisfying to you as others. So let's talk a little bit about it. All about the people. I think this is the best culture to work in, when the company is really oriented to the employees, the contractors, the customers, that people are first. It's really easy to align security around people. and they are your most important asset, and you need to be able to show value in how you protect the people. The second one is more the analytical or logical kinds of cultures, often engineering-driven, sometimes heavy manufacturing. But these are the companies that want facts, figures, metrics. They're most likely to ask you, what's the business case for your program? The third one is more the utilitarian. They have a very defined view of security. Hey, this is Gates, Guns, and Guards. We've got people getting into our sites. Get the job done, make this go away. These are also often the companies that are driven heavily by regulation. Electrical energy companies, oil and gas, are often very regulatory, process-driven. And that's their first question. Is this a regulatory requirement? If not, why are you talking to me about it? The reserved and guarded generally have a pretty low opinion of security. They want you to prove why you want to do what you want to do is something that should be done. These are the people that most frequently say, what's everybody else in our sector doing? But this is a very skeptical kind of a leadership. The innovative companies, a lot of the startups, a lot of the dot-com, the software companies, these are all based on innovation. They really expect you to lead. They expect you to add value. They're really open to new ideas. If you're not that kind of person, this isn't the right company for you. They want out-of-the-box thinking. Reactive. The last one is more the reactive companies. They're going to always be doing the fire drills. You're often in the facilities organization. It's about alarms, access control, cameras, gates, and they react to the problem at hand. Like organizational readiness, you really can't control corporate culture. You'll be more successful if you align to it instead of against it. To try and put a program in place that doesn't meet the culture is a failure waiting to happen, and it's not very rewarding. Believe me, I've done it, unfortunately, before I knew about these things. And that's why we're sharing this. It's really important to identify the culture of your organization, values, and what executive drivers are. Use this knowledge to communicate your programs and to strategize your programs in order to define something that's really going to be successful. One of our next learnings was around risk appetite, that we could do all the other things we've previously talked about, and yet the program wasn't valued or supported. That really had to do with risk appetite. Companies have to take risks. They know that. It's part of their business. This diagram is really how we talk about risks. So let's say that all those little red attackers are your risks: theft, fraud, you've got concern with insider threat, regulatory risk, whatever it might be. Those are your red attackers. Now those gray bands, those aren't walls, those are filters. And they're really your mitigation filters. And obviously we do layers of protection or zones of protection. And so let's put it in a facility context. Let's say that first filter is a sign at your property line. This is XYZ company, authorized business only. Well, most people are going to turn away if they don't want to be on your property. If they're not coming to see you, they leave. And that's a great cost-effective mitigation strategy. But clearly anybody that wants to come in for good or bad reasons can. So maybe your next thing is a fence with a security officer. Obviously that little green guy going through there, that's your legitimate customer, and you've got to get your customer through all your mitigation in the most effective manner. And this doesn't matter if it's coming in online or if they're walking onto the property. But in this case, we'll stick with the property. So now you have a security officer at a gate or card access at that gate, and this filters out a bunch more people that don't want to be there. Obviously, bad things can still happen even at that level. Now, that white space in between those filters is the risk appetite of the company. And just so you know, security doesn't own the risk. Management does. The risk is owned by the people who can afford to mitigate it. So you need to know how much risk the business wants to take. And those red attackers that go through the filter, that's your residual risk. One of the biggest mistakes we often see is people say, well, if you give me enough money for fencing and security officers, that risk goes away. No, it doesn't. It really just lowers the odds of something bad happening. So what you want to do is make sure that they understand the level of residual risk, that people can still get in. It's going to be much more difficult. We're going to filter out most of them, but you do not want to bet the farm that any mitigation strategy is going to be perfect. Their level of risk, how much they're willing to pay to mitigate it, and how much risk they're willing to accept is critical for you to define this. You know, it's not the CSO's job to determine the acceptable level of risk. And security can't just say no all the time. The executives of your company are at a high enough level that they can accept a huge amount of risk. And think about risk as a dollar number. I think the highest level I was ever able to assign for was just under $300,000. Well, I couldn't accept a risk bigger than that. I had to go to my boss if the risk of an incident or the cost to address it was more than $300,000. In order to make a good informed business decision, you have to go to the business owner that owns that risk. The next Opal Plus that we learned about was looking at either what we call the executive drivers or catalysts for the security program. We used to think that this was kind of company-wide. It was a regulatory-based company, it was a risk-based company, or it was a business case company. That's not really the case now because there's so much cross-pollination of executives that we're hiring executives from other industries, other companies, other countries, that executives come in with a catalyst or a driver around security. And you can now have all of these people in your company. You've got to assess both the executive and the company's catalyst for why they want security. If a person's only regulatory, then you better talk about your mitigation strategies in a regulation-based format. If they're all about risk, then you need to identify what risk each mitigation reduces. And if they want a business case, either for a capital expenditure or, hey, what's the business value that your program brings, you have to be prepared to respond to that. And you can have all of these in the same organization now, much more than ever before. All right, let's talk about what's possible. And that's really what Opal Plus is. It helps you evaluate and determine what's possible. You still have to make the decision. You still have to build the strategic plan around it. But this is going to help you create and implement that successful program, and it's going to make you more successful. But at the end of the day, remember, you're selling this program. A lot of people say, well, I don't do sales. Well, you can call it whatever you want, but to be a successful security leader, you're going to be a successful salesperson. Remember, there's no business school in America that teaches these executives about security risk. You're out there educating and selling all the time. Do the research. You have to understand your market. You have to understand your customers. You have to know your product and the value it brings. And that's what Opal's all about. Your best path for success is one at which you look at all levels of Opal and align them with each other. The most successful security leaders and programs that we have studied do this very, very well. And I encourage you to take advantage of what we're sharing with you. If I'd known this 15 or 20 years ago, I'd be a lot more successful than I ever could have been without it. And so I hope this has caused you to think and to reevaluate how you're approaching your program development, design, and implementation. And what I really hope is that it's been helpful for you. Thanks. We'll talk to you later.